Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Michael J.
So, just absolutely nothing to talk about this week, right?
Yeah, I mean, aside from the biggest wave of bans, standard bans since the Affinity era. To say nothing of, I don't know, a whole new set.
Yeah, I was all geared up. Oh, there's so many new cards from Rivals of Ixalan to talk about. They're pretty... What just happened?
Come on now. You had to know that Aether... Like, we've been talking about how Attune with Aether and Rogue Refiner were going to get Ixnay. Yeah.
There are zero surprises coming from my side of the universe around cards like Attune with Aether or Rogue Refiner. We should still talk about those things, but there's no surprise. But
Ramunap Ruins can't have caught you out of the blue, though, right?
So, let's just start with number 4. Okay, we can talk about the other ones, right? So, to begin with, I think it was remarkably well thought out. In hindsight, after reading what they had to say,
well thought out. You're talking about the banning of Rampaging Ferocidon?
Yes, I am. I'm actually that's my spoiler at the end. I actually get where they're coming from, but A, I was shocked when it happened, and B, I wouldn't have done it. Those. What do you think about the gnarled mass 2K17 RIP 217?
Okay, so I think it's a nuanced subject. It's complicated, right? It's not the natural thing to have to deal with a world where there are 9 standard bans and 5 blocks in a row that have had cards banned in standard.
Yeah, this hasn't happened in a long, long time.
Okay, so there's a couple different levels to look at the Ferocidon aspect of the ban, because I think the other 3 are not exactly controversial. The Ramunap Ruins one would surprise a lot of people, but I don't think anybody they wouldn't be surprised to hear it be true. They wouldn't necessarily have bet on it, but it makes total sense.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Just
the Ferocidon one. So the Ferocidon one is tricky because at a high level, I really don't like banning a thing worth killing, particularly when it's the 9th best card in a deck and it has some amount of difference between some of what it's doing compared to other cards in the deck. It's you don't start by, it's a slippery slope to ban Juggernaut. Right? You're not really solving the problem.
You're saying Orcish
but there's
Oriflame? Shouldn't have banned Orcish Oriflame that one time?
But I do think that under the circumstances, if there's some premises that if I accept these premises, then I think that this is a good move. Because I think that once you're at the space of being we have to overshoot, right? It's pretty bad to have to ban a 4th time, right? And up to 9 cards now, right? But the difference between 8 and 9 isn't as bad as the different doing 8 now and then let's say they do 8 and then red is actually the best anyway. Right? That's annoying. That's frustrating. It's repetitive. Part of the problem is that the experience has been so not varied for so long. I think they have a lot of incentive to overshoot.
But
Additionally,
please give a reaction for a second. I am queasy about something which you referenced just now, and I think was part of their calculus in banning Rampaging Ferocidon. We barely knew him. He didn't even get a win a Pro Tour yet, like Ramunap Ruins. The thing that I'm queasy about is I come up from the tradition. Randy Buehler taught me this from when he was in charge of R&D, which is that you don't ban decks, you ban broken cards, right? The
Watsy's job. Totally wrong. I totally disagree with that. I think that is so an artifact. It was fine. It was an advancement of the technology for the age, but that was 15 years ago. You do want to ban cards that are not necessarily overpowered cards. There's no reason why you have to ban only broken cards. The goal isn't fair. The goal is making the experience fun and satisfying for people. If it makes the format better, if it makes the format more fun, if everybody enjoys the experience more, banning the 8th best card is a better move than banning the most broken card. If it actually, if banning the broken card would make the experience more repetitive or boring, that was the whole problem, is that they used to be focused on trying to ban the power cards. Who cares? Let cards be good. Dude, good cards are sweet. It's not like Ramunap Ruins is great. It's also the perfect card to ban for reasons that are not just power level. Hazoret is a messed up card. But it's not like you should ban Hazoret. Who cares? It's not like banning Hazoret or Chandra, or we don't want to just go around okay, let's take your 8.7 and ban it so that now we have an 8.5 that you have to play. It's also not that that you want to be in a spot where every time the solution is, okay, we have to just ban the single most powerful card and there's no replacement and they just have to be... No, the idea is about making the experience more fun and satisfying, and I think that one of the problems that the last format had, perhaps the loudest problem, outside of, this is off topic, but a fundamentally flawed balance, the game is just balanced around really hopelessly flawed things. But setting that aside, the problem with the last format was that even though everybody knew that Energy and Red were so good, they couldn't do anything about it. Right? A lot of people, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, tasked with only 2 decks. There are only 2 decks. And the end result was always play one of the 2 decks. That's it.
That's a bit of an exaggeration. There were more than 2 decks.
It's not. There were not. There were energy
one
decks
deck. There's
Red.
3 distinct.
They all blur together. They don't feel distinct when you play against them.
I think that playing against 4-color Energy feels very similar to playing against Temur until you get to sideboarded games. But I think playing against Sultai Energy is a dramatically different experience than playing against 4-color Energy.
You have a sophisticated palette.
It's just way different. The valuation is different.
No, it's not. It's not about the strategic decisions. Okay, what is the card? What are you supposed? Let's say you're sick of losing to energy decks. And regardless of whether some person says, yeah, it's interesting the nuance between the battle of dealing with Vraska versus somebody else, like this other deck that has all the bristling hydras and the glorybringers and that may be interesting to you, but let's say you're a person who just knows that Long Tusk Cub keeps killing you. What are you supposed to do?
Long Tusk Cub is indeed a murderer.
What are you supposed to do? There's nothing. It's not like you can just go get cards that you're like, man, I sure should just play with all these cards that are pro energy. I'm going to play with more pro energy cards,
So I just say, but hold on, point of distinction, right? Long Tusk Cub early in the game is dangerous from any of the 3 energy decks that I referenced, but one of them, is much more likely to be able to protect it with...
Dude, I promise you, as much as it might be, super important to you, the nuance of the distinction of the post-sideboard Sultai Energy versus Temur Energy matchup, that's not the experience that most people have, and it doesn't matter. The whole point was just that Rampaging Ferocidon specifically negates the counterplay that is intuitive to people for how to address the red deck. When you are sick of losing to red, it is nice to be able to go get life gain and actually get some percentage back. There may not be protection from red creatures floating around right now, but there are cards that gain life.
Hold that thought. A fresh new year has begun, and if you're setting new goals for your business, it's extremely difficult to reach them without the right people on your team. And ZipRecruiter has transformed how you go about finding them. ZipRecruiter posts your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards with just one click. Then, ZipRecruiter actively looks for the most qualified candidates and invites them to apply. They even review every application to identify the top candidates, so you never miss a great match. That's why ZipRecruiter is different. Unlike other hiring sites, ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on the right candidates finding you. It finds them. No wonder 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by businesses of all sizes and industries to find the most qualified job candidates with immediate results. And right now, our listeners can post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/top level. That's right, ZipRecruiter.com/top level. One more time to try it for free. Go to ZipRecruiter.com/top level.
People get sick of losing to the same decks over and over again and not having an answer that they can go get. One of the problems with Affinity was that when people have 3 or 4 losses in a row to Affinity, and they're like, well, shoot, all my opponents beat me with artifacts. Let me go get some shatters. And that doesn't super work out for them, right? The problem is when you encounter something that's beating you over and over and over and over again, if you don't have tools that you can go get that will allow you to sacrifice other matchups to try to get more edge against this, that's very frustrating. It cuts off an enormous amount of the space there is. There's just so much less room to explore for the format to evolve if there's nothing you can do for most decks to be able to even interact with these decks. And I'm not saying that for Rampaging Ferocidon it's the only way they could go, but I do think that there are some considerations where people who are sick of losing to red want to have the ability to go get cards that can allow them to actually interact with red decks. And if by banning Rampaging Ferocidon very little, it doesn't actually affect them that much. However, it disproportionately benefits anybody who wants to slant their strategy against red. It's so brilliant of a way to balance the format if your goal is to help the people who are sick of losing to the same thing over and over and over again.
So that's why I was said earlier that I was just super into and agreed with the banning of Rampaging Ferocidon, even if I wouldn't have thought of it myself, and I certainly would have bet on it. Because just playing, from the blue-white perspective, I played, not energy and not red for most of the end of the last season, played blue-white, and you had this insane amount of variability in games where you're just like, all right, I'm just going to dump half my sideboard in against these guys. And you have these games where you're like, first turn Authority the Consuls, and it seems unwinnable for the red deck as early as turn 1 or 2. But then, you could have these games where you're like, I have all these Authority the Consuls, I have all these Regal Caracals, and you're just completely just destroyed by this 3-drop. And it feels really strange to devote so many resources and sometimes just annihilate them, and other times the Regal Caracal is actually a gigantic liability, right? Because he's triggering the Ferocidon rather than nerfing the Ferocidon.
Keep in mind, I think that in general you want to have stuff like Ferocidon to be able to help the red deck keep if they're sick of losing to the Authority of the Councils or the Regal Caracal. It's just that lately it's been so much the one way, and white has been so hopelessly behind. It's not the worst time to overshoot and make sure that there's actually more counterplay that sticks against the red decks.
I think this is a kind of a callback to very strange earlier formats. Do you remember back when there was Mystical Teachings and then the mono blue Vesuvian shapeshifter deck? Yeah, and then also like the Naya colored like gain life, make your Kavu bigger, and then there was all these other decks, but like the top was really really weird because 1 always beat going down except 3 beat 1.
I don't know what you mean by 1 beat 3.
Oh, like the best deck beat almost everything else except the third best deck always beat it, and it always beat everything going down. And then the
I
Naya.
don't think it's true, though. I don't know. People say that, but I think they were just wrong.
Yeah, they might be the case. I'm just saying, like, if you look at the structure of Standard up until these bans, I don't know. I think I had an odd experience relative to the people who were advocating against Red, because I was a big Red player for a long time, but I just found it so frustrating to play against Temur. Like, I'd never win. I would never win against Temur. I would get great draws, and they would just destroy me with Whirler Virtuoso. So I didn't have this perception that Red needed to be nerfed. But maybe it did, because it's so much better against...
Well, Red had the best win percentage in the format.
Unless you counted against Energy, right? Like, wasn't Energy advantaged?
No, I'm saying, like, if you look at all the matchups weighted by how frequently people play, if you literally just look at the Red deck's matchups, total, the problem is how many of the people in the format that would try to make decks that could actually compete with Energy, the Red deck had a great percentage against those decks. You see, the real so Energy versus Ramunap Red was so often pretty close to a coin flip. But the problem is that the Red decks could just really beat up on all the people who were just not willing to accept the paradigm of there are only 2 decks.
Yeah, what happened to your black-blue deck? Wasn't your black-blue deck good against these decks for a long time? Like, why did it just disappear? No, it was just fake?
It was good. It was just that the Energy decks evolved their sideboard. That's it.
Yeah.
Because it used to have such an advantage where it was like it would smoke them game 1, and then after sideboard it would be good enough to have a sizable advantage. However, they both have a better tuned main deck so that they are less vulnerable, and they have a substantially more precision oriented sideboard that allows them to be actively favored.
Yeah. So,
and that's to say nothing of the Red deck's ability to evolve and actually be like less vulnerable.
Oh, just to like the sweet 2 drops. Like the sweet 2 drops are awesome at the beginning of the
and just not playing with like for instance, not playing a braids or whatever. It doesn't have to be a braid, but my point is not being overloaded on the wrong type of threats.
Yeah, I just remember from like the blue-white side, you'd have this great advantage against Temur and largely against 4-color in game 1 also, but that you might or might not have a huge advantage in the sideboarded games, and it was really up to them, right? If people played these kind of one-dimensional sideboards of like, I'm going to add some negates and try to interact with your high-end sorceries, you could build a sideboard that would still be greatly advantaged against them. But if they did other stuff, right, like I'm going to play a bunch of Planeswalkers and do this, or I'm going to play Lifecrafter's Bestiaria instead, it got really weird. And then you were horrible against Red, and then the only strategy that you could have is to dump your whole sideboard in against them. And if they had a Ferocidon, you were still horrible against them in sideboarded games.
So I don't know. I think that it's not actually the biggest deal in the world, them banning the Ferocidon, but I do think that I generally like the approach of making the conversation a little bit more about what's fun instead of what's fair. And if they have reason to, like, if they believe that they needed to take a bigger bite out of Red, and if they believed that the Ferocidon ban is the one that helps the people, the right people the most, you know, I think that's, I would rather see them do that than just ban from the top, you know?
Well, they got real good people, smart people doing playtesting right now, so I would guess that might be the case.
I also just really prefer coming from a place of a little bit more theory. The fact that they're banning not, like, I don't think it's the first, like, nobody suggests Ferocidon as the first card, right? But, like, that is a sign of in-depth discussion and debate and exploration, experimentation. That's I think that's a promising sign anyway. Like, I think that I wish I could say that this is it. I don't know that it is. I think that as long as Kaladesh and Aether Revolt are legal, there are a lot of problems. Like, there's so many other things. I think Kaladesh and Aether Revolt are the faster that those cards can get out of standard, the better. But until those cards rotate out, I think that we are always at risk. There's always jeopardy of more stuff needing to get banned because those two sets are so
skewing.
They're fundamentally broken. Not broken like necessarily overpowered, although they frequently are. They are broken as in the underlying structure to them does not work. It is broken. I mean, I don't know. I think that, like, so Mark Rosewater is one of my biggest inspirations in life. He's one of the people who has taught me the most. He is an unbelievable master. You don't have to always agree with somebody, and I know that he has at least in the past. Perhaps his position has evolved. I don't know. He has at least in the past, described the energy mechanic as a good mechanic, and that it was just balanced wrong. And I totally disagree, at least in this implementation. And I do think that it is fair to describe the execution beyond more than just numbers. I think the style of execution of the mechanic's fundamental conceit is that you can just convert resources at will without spending mana at instant speed, and all of the different outputs and inputs are relatively constrained. There's it's not like there's the sub-game of some cards are good at producing energy and some cards are good at spending it. That game is there's so little of that part of the experience. And it's not like the individual cards with energy are producing such novel, interesting effects. They're just giving you the most generic resource. Some cards give you counters, +1/+1 counters. Some cards make a token. Some cards, like, it's just more resource. It's all just resource, and it's just this empty resource manipulation thing that you never have to commit to anything. It's just like so many of the other problems where you don't have to make an investment. You can literally just wait. Why bother pumping your whatever? Why not just wait? Why bother using your Whirler Virtuoso? Imagine if you had to use Whirler Virtuoso on your own turn. So that then you have to make a commitment. Do it or don't. Not any of this just always wait until their end step or in response to a kill spell. That's the Sakura Tribal Elder experience, where it looks on the surface like it's adding, but it's actually cutting out any of the game. And I think that the implementation of energy as conceived in the Kaladesh Aether Revolt block, I think it's not a balance thing. I think it's a play pattern experience. It is anyway.
Let me ask you.
Sorry, ranting, but the whole mechanic, the fundamental idea that a block should be based on making broken combo cards is also troubled. And I don't know where it became a thing that there's like 21 different cards in that set that you can do like one of those a set and you're like, okay, this is pretty intense. Gonti's Aetherheart or whatever, right? And it's like, sweet, that's cool. You do two, you're like, okay. Doing 21 in the same set doesn't make any sense to me. I just disagree with the idea that you need to build a broken combo machine and that all the cards are supposed to be balanced around creating engines. But anyway.
I find a lot of this to be fascinating. Can I actually just ask you some specific stuff from what you just said and then kind of pull out some of the specifics? I'm actually really interested just in some of these things. First thing I'd ask is, do you think that, I mean, obviously we would have had fewer problems, but do you think that we might not have had the level of skewing and necessity of banning if cards like Aetherworks Marvel, Whirler Virtuoso, and Longtusk Cub had to be used at sorcery speed?
I mean, it's different. It's a step in the right direction. There are so many fundamental problems with the block that it's challenging to know where you draw the lines. But I think that an enormous difference not just in power. It is a big power level change to make Long Tusk Cub and Aetherworks Marvel and Whirler Virtuoso, all those having to be main phase. That is a substantial impact that isn't just like a nerf. It's actually requiring some amount of investment. It makes the play experience better. But that doesn't resolve the fact that they just made cards like Rogue Refiner makes no sense. Right? Like, so the amount that you're supposed to charge, you charge -1 for having to be the recipient of a couple energy. Like, you have to just charge a negative amount. Like, I don't like that they balance the cards around the idea that all the different, like, Long Tusk Cub would be good if it didn't interact with energy at all. If it was just its own thing. If it only worked with its own stuff, you know? And, like, Whirler Virtuoso would be an excellent card if it didn't use the energy mechanic. It literally just made a 1/1 Thopter. Look at freaking Pia Noir!
Well, yeah, I mean, look at Hordling Outburst. It's way better than Hordling Outburst.
Glimmer of Genius would be a good card. How many people have used Glimmer of Genius and don't even use the energy?
All of them.
Tendo Ice Bridge got played a lot.
By me.
They balanced it in a way where they just made it so that none of the energy cards did anything particularly novel. They were all just resource things, and then they didn't charge for it. So let's say that you make them sorcery speed, and you actually charge people for energy, and you make some cards with energy that are actually, like, that use energy more efficiently so that you're actually putting something together. Fine, you can do all that, and that's well and good, and that's great. I think that you fundamentally can't just start with the premise of Toolcraft Exemplar. That's not the right thing to balance around. I think that there's a lot of other things that, like, the set has too many hyper-aggressive cards. It's got too big of like, the top is too high spiking. Like, the energy mechanic, I think, is just, I fundamentally disagree with how it's, structured. I think that the idea of having all these engine cards, like, I get that Aetherworks Marvel might have come in a little higher than they were hoping. We said that it was, like, we called it out as broken literally the first minute that we looked at it on the spoiler. The first minute, the real-time reaction was, I think this is actually broken.
Yeah, card advantage.
But setting that aside,
and unlimited mana that costs 0 mana could be a problem, yes. Because it's card advantage and mana.
But setting that aside, let's say that its rate was slightly more modest. Fine, whatever, right? Like, maybe it takes 8 energy, whatever. The point is that when you have Aether Flux Reservoir, Aetherworks Marvel, you've got the Dynavolt Tower, Decoction Module, Key to the City, Gurupur Orrery, Panharmonicon, like, all these different engines, and that's just the artifacts. That's not even getting into all the different enchantments and stuff. Like, you don't get to say that it was just the one that broke when you literally took 40 shots that may have been ill-advised. So I don't know. I think that it would be a step in the right direction, but I think that Kaladesh and Aether Revolt, they suffer from being on a... It's too bad, too. It breaks my heart because I think these sets are dope in like 4 ways out of 5. 80% of the stuff about these sets, not 80% of the cards, because there's an underlying problem, but like 80% of, more than 80%, there are incredible. The world is beautiful. The synergy between the different mechanics, very smart. The level of different designs, the way they plug into each other, there's so much to like about this set. There's so much to like. But I think that bodes well, because I think that some of the issues with the set can act like in the future there can be break a different way on, and a lot of the stuff they did really well, you can't just replicate that at random. That takes a level of mastery and a bunch of people who get it. The way that the way this world is constructed, the way the different pieces fit into each other, the amount of depth that is available in so many of these cards without it just being this card does 5 things. There is a lot to like, and there's an incredible number of super appealing cards in this set. I just disagree with what it's balanced around. I disagree with the execution of energy at even a high level, not just a balance level. And I think that too many of the PowerPoints are in cards that lead to the same experience over and over again. And in particular, low rarity cards, so that they just frequently appear. End rant.
All right. How about this question?
Yeah.
Do you think that it's just generally a bad policy to take something that would be just a plausible card that you could play in another context and then add something onto it for free, or do you think it's a frequency
No, I don't think that's a bad policy. I don't think that's a bad policy at all. It's not a frequency problem either. Not really. I mean, it is a little, but that's not the real problem. The real problem. See, okay, if you made Rogue Refiner, or no, Aether. I think actually Attune with Aether is an even better example.
Attune is the perfect example, right? Because multiple versions of this card that didn't have a tag, and they were just perfectly excellent to play in constructed Magic.
Yep. So Attune with Aether, I think, is a good example because it's not completely free compared to some of the recent stuff they did, like Traverse, but it is free compared to most of the history of Magic, and I would argue that Traverse is a little too pushy as well. In any event, if you were to give them an Attune, that's one thing. Subsidizing a deck, a strategy, whatever, like for instance, I don't think it's fundamentally flawed for a specific deck to have certain cards that are quote-unquote too good that not other people can take advantage of. That's just the game. The problem comes when you make all of the energy cards this. They're not about the energy. The energy is a thing that they become about. That's an aspect of their kit. But you're not investing. You're not taking a risk. You're not risking anything by playing Rogue Refiner. There's no gamble. You're not making a decision with any sort of weight or significance behind it at all. You did what? You played with a card that had the best rate. It even replaces itself. There's nothing to it. And it would be fine if there was one card that was just, of course, we subsidized the energy strategy by giving them a card or two that's like so good of a rate. None of their cards do anything except convert things hyper efficiently with almost no, or in many cases, no cost to the rate at all. Harness Lightning would be good even if it had nothing to do with the energy mechanic.
With the rest of the energy mechanic, right? You want to have you want to be able to stack multiple Harness Lightnings in the way that
that would make it even better, but people have played 2-mana deal 3. And that's not even what Harness Lightning is about. You can play a deck with no other energy cards, just Harness Lightning, and it's super good. You don't have to risk anything. So the biggest thing you have to risk with Harness Lightning is the opportunity cost of you could have just played a different one of the 5 different lightning strikes.
So let me just maybe see if I can overlay a parallel onto this. And I'm not talking about the specific strength of the cards, because obviously one card on the other side, which I'll tell you in a second, is much stronger, but that the majority of the energy cards are stronger. Like the snow mechanic, right? That would be just from what you're drawing on from a parallel. Like the snow mechanic, you have to give up a lot in order to go snow, right? Versus the energy mechanic just pays you. Would this be a reasonable way to split? There's no snow cards.
It's not. No, okay, it's important to distinguish between the rate of the cards. Not most of the energy cards don't have as good of a rate as Rogue Refiner. That's not the fundamental problem. The problem is that so much of the card's power is that it's just like a normal card. It just happens to free roll the ability to move stuff around. And often you waste it because there's no reason not to, because you don't have to pay for it. If it's one thing, okay, so I don't think that snow is like some great mechanic, right? Like I don't think that's fundamentally just this obviously good thing to exist. But if you're going to do the snow mechanic, it's much better for it to not be a pure free roll. if there's no reason for people to not just play, if you're supposed to just play all Snowlands all the time in every deck, it's not interesting. You're not risking anything. Your decision has no gravity, no weight to it.
Sure, like
these energy cards.
It was just generally speaking a worse card than Farseek, and they were, in Standard at the same time. But you play Into the North, that you have to pay for that, right? Like, you play Into the North instead of Farseek in a deck that has Snow because you need access to particular cards. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, to a degree, okay, so let me give you the example with the energy. Let's imagine that there's an energy, pick one. How about Rogue Refiner? What if Rogue Refiner costs 4 and gave you more energy? Or what if the energy itself was more valuable? Or what if there were some cards that could convert energy more effectively, so it was actually just really valuable to be able to get energy with a card, right? What if Glimmer of Genius, let's use one that has a closer analog. What if Glimmer of Genius actually gave you, if Glimmer of Genius cost 5, where it's like confusing, but it's generally a little bit worse than other card draw options, except that you're getting enough energy. And let's just make it, let's say you get however much energy it takes for the card to actually be good enough. Fine. But now you're paying something. Instead of just free rolling the best card draw spell in your color anyway, you have to make a sacrifice to synergize with your energy component. Aether Hub. You're free rolling it anyway. So many people just play it because it's Tendo Ice Bridge. But what if it came into play tapped and energy was so valuable that the ability to get energy out of your land was like super valuable? And maybe Aether Hub is the type of one that you're supposed to give them at no extra. Maybe Aether Hub should be exactly as is and should just be the type of card that's just. I question doing it in the same block as Spire of Industry. That makes no sense. But setting that aside, I think that having Aether Hub be one, that could be fine, but it would be nice if most of these involved some amount of opportunity cost, So instead of just, yeah.
Let me see if I can paraphrase this, because I think, and I'm not so quick on the uptake, is part of the problem, because I asked a question about just adding something for free onto something that you might want in another context, and that wasn't the problem. Is part of the problem that when you cast an Attune...
Well, no, it's not. It's not that. It's all that. It's if every card is just hacking something on. It's fine for there to be one or two if you want to subsidize a strategy. The problem is if the entire strategy is nothing but that.
So, but what I'm asking is, is part of the problem you could cast a Attune with Aether on turn 1, and then now on turn 2, you can blow up a Tarmogoyf or something with it because it's so powerful with a Harness Lightning, and it's because the Attune with Aether, kind of had an additive effect on this other card, and that. But you don't have
that's
to.
The good part. Yeah. Okay. So, but you're still just you can balance the game around whatever. That's not the problem. The problem is that there's no opportunity cost. You're doing it for free. Okay, so let me give you an example of the right way. Aetherworks Marvel is a broken card. It's got a lot wrong with it, but it's got something really, really, really right with it, and it makes total sense to me why they would have wanted it to be one of the things they pushed in energy. Regardless, this Aetherworks Marvel, to me, Aetherworks Marvel, that one is a really good design that just was balanced wrong. That is the right idea. You see, with Aetherworks Marvel, you get the energy and can spend the energy, but the way you get the energy isn't nearly as efficient as the way you spend the energy. So Aetherworks Marvel makes you interested in playing with different other cards. It makes you want to play with Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot or Glassblower's Puzzle Knot or whatever. I mean, you play with different cards, and it could be Rogue Refiner, it could be Borderland Virtuoso, it could be anything else. But Aetherworks Marvel makes those other cards' energy worth more to you. And as a result, you make different decisions than you normally would. Now, it's unfortunate that most of the enabler, there's so many different enablers. You see, when Aetherworks Marvel was legal, at least some of the cards people played, there was incentive to play with cards that made a sacrifice to make the Aetherworks Marvel better. Once they banned Aetherworks Marvel, there was no more incentive to try to get energy efficiently. All the energy cards they all convert energy the same. So why bother? Why not just play all the ones that are free rolling?
So Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot used to be one of the more popular cards in Standard, and it just went to zero, right? Because getting something for going to the graveyard was no longer being paid off. Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way, and I'm someone who sacrificed.
And the energy, Aetherworks Marvel. So Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot doesn't even let you spend the energy, right? What cards do people play with now that don't let you spend the energy on something? The only ones are ones that are free rolling. They're so efficient.
Yeah,
but it's not like
better than. I mean, unless you're inspirationing someone to death, right? It's just better than the default because it has the digging.
But Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, while it is not the least efficient way to gain life, it's not like 5 mana to gain 6 is like some crazy, unbelievably good exchange rate, right? Like Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, if you're going to do the whole combo-y thing, I think that stuff like Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot and the Aetherworks Marvel is the right idea. I think the Aetherworks Marvel is too easy, and I think that it's actually I get why you would want to have two that just solve each other, but I think it's too easy. Not even just from a balance standpoint. I think it actually is just much more satisfying with Aetherworks Marvel if you have to actually put your machine together, not just open-close the combo.
Well, there's also the randomness of it, right? Like, sometimes you just have a game where you flip the Marvel 3 times and never hit.
And the other part of the problem, with Aetherworks Marvel was that it just shouldn't have been around at the same time as Uldamog, and etc. All the different Eldrazi,
Oh, okay, yeah, Emrakul.
But yeah, exactly, all that stuff. So if you set aside all those issues, I think at a fundamental level, Aetherworks Marvel is the proof of concept of Rosewater's Dream, I guess, or all the different, and whoever it is that wanted energy in this form. I think that Aetherworks Marvel is an example of the right way, even if it's an abomination in terms of rate and tone deafness of context or whatever. But that's a balance thing. You can make a version of Aetherworks Marvel that is sweet. Right? There's an amount. Aetherworks Marvel would be sweet. For instance, in retrospect, if Aetherworks Marvel could just cost 8 energy to do the thing and cost 5 to cast, whatever. Great. But it's not like Rogue Refiner becomes an interesting card if it only gives you 1 energy. It's a 3/2 that just draws a card. It's not even interesting.
I think if you and I understand this is a big if, right? But if you remove it from a lot of the context, Rogue Refiner doesn't seem to me to be that offensive of a card because it's 2 different colors, so it's just a pushed card. I think the problem is it's one of the colors is green, and they give you Attune with Aether, which basically makes Rogue Refiner free. If it were blue-red, for example, I think it would have been way less of an issue in Standard.
I don't know, man. I just disagree with the idea that that's the right rate to it doesn't. It's not that you can't make cards better than it. It's that it has no personality, nothing. It's material. It's just a cantrip. It's I don't think you should just do 3/2 draw a card for 3, let alone get energy. I think that's the wrong thing to push. That's the problem. That is underlying. That's the area that I think that is the thing that is the poison. That's the problem. They make these cards. It's not that you can't get away with making a cantrip. It's that you ought not. It's not wise to make that all the time. You can do some amount of that stuff some of the time, but it's ridiculous how much way too far. You know what's an interesting card? Architect of the Untamed. That's a cool card. That is a cool card. 2 and a green, when a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get an energy and you can pay 8 energy to get a 6/6. That's a cool card. It lets you make your other energy cards turn into something that has more value, more meaning. That is an example of the thing that is right. The problem with energy isn't just the rate of the cards. It's that they put all of the power into cards that are just rate. They're not even trying to explore the space that energy promised at the beginning. And so it's possible, if if Rosewater's premise is that our energy would have been a good mechanic if it was structured around stuff like Architect of the Untamed and Aetherworks Marvel, then I would say I agree. I think there's a version of that mechanic you can do that is decent. It's not. I think it's a separate thing. I think it's weird to do immediately after Devoid and Colorless Energy, but I question that whole thing also. But like, because Colorless Energy and Devoid, it's just like, okay, so I just have resource and I just manipulate it. I think you really, 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 if you're just going to have resource manipulation mechanics, it's important for them to be flavorful and evocative. I think the energy would have been such a bigger hit. Like, let me give an example of a different world, and I don't think it's appropriate for Kaladesh, but imagine if the energy mechanic was executed like it's Phyrexian themed, and all the Phyrexians have this Phyrexian oil, whatever the thing is, the tainted, whatever their thing is.
Yep.
The energy is the corruption of the Phyrexians, right? And they can, it makes total sense that they would be able to convert their resource back and forth. They got this whole Borg sort of thing going, right? But if instead of just energy is a very, very empty thing. Energy, it's just energy. What is it? It's energy. If instead it was, if it was corruption, or if it was oil, or it was something that linked to the Phyrexians, and all the cards that had it were Phyrexian, and the outputs felt Phyrexian, and it led to situations where some of the Phyrexians could get energy more efficiently, some of them could spend energy more efficiently, or the oil or whatever it is, that could have been such an evocative feel, instead of literally, okay, if you have mass, you can, you put some force on it and there's some energy, and it's like there's no thing. It's not like they're taking advantage of the cars, right? Like, this world has flavorful elements in it, and instead of anything flavorful, it's just resource. Anyway, you gotta cut me off. I wish that they would have done it, though, in a way that was, like, linked to, it doesn't matter. I just think that the sooner the Kaladesh and Aether Revolt can rotate out, the sooner we can get back to a standard involving it'll just seem like magic. It'll just seem like magic because stuff will, no pun intended, but it'll just, like magic, everything will just start magically. The games will be better and the decks will be more diverse and there'll be more experiences that are good, and the games will have, like, don't get me wrong, it's not that the games don't have skill in them. I mean, you just sit around and play Energy Mirrors all day and it's super skill testing. That's not the problem. Anyway.
I actually think that that's an improvement, right? Like, early on, the skill testingness of the format was really, really up in the air, in my opinion. Back when Blue-White with Smuggler's Copter was on top, I don't know. That
was a different format.
Yeah, I mean, it's flavored by the same things that your
dude, Smuggler's Copter,
frustration.
Smuggler's, I don't know about frustration. Maybe it is. But I can tell you that it breaks my heart. Smuggler's Copter would have been so amazing and awesome of a card to exist if it was balanced correctly. The play experience of Smuggler's Copter is actually dope. It's so good. There's attacking and blocking. It gives you incentives to play with creatures. It shows off the new mechanic in a way that there's decisions that have gravity. Like, for instance, when you decide to crew your copter, you're taking a risk. And then even if you get to attack, you then make a decision. And then it has synergy with so many different types of mechanics that existed. And it has flying, getting flying into constructed. There is so much to like about Smuggler's Copter. I just wish it was a 3-1. It would be amazing as a 3-1.
I can't believe this transformed into why we like Smuggler's Copter.
I love Smuggler's Copter. I hate the rate. It would be amazing. It might be too good still, but I would bet there's at least a punter's chance that it would not have needed to be banned if it was a 3-1. But that doesn't see. That's an example, though. Smuggler's Copter, there is so much to like about Smuggler's Copter. I think Smuggler's Copter is super dope. That one was just balanced, but it's balanced wrong, And it's because that's all descendant of this world. It's not really even Toolcraft Exemplar's fault. Toolcraft Exemplar is just emblematic of the flaw. Thalia's Lieutenant was really the problem.
How is Thalia's Lieutenant the problem?
It's gone now. Thalia's Lieutenant created a legacy. Thalia's Lieutenant was pushed so much in a certain way. Now, I think that Thalia's Lieutenant was a problem converged with the problem of it being, like there was this idea of wanting the dwarf. Like, you can tell they wanted the dwarves to, like, be a thing that could really show up and work with the vehicles, and they wanted it to be a new thing, and they didn't want you to just play with humans. The problem is that Thalia's Lieutenant was so beyond that, like, it was just not reasonable to make dwarves that could actually be reasonable to consider instead of just being humans. The problem is that they did it anyway. Like, it wasn't reasonable to make, like, it wasn't reasonable at all, and yet they just made Toolcraft Exemplar. It's not a reasonable card. Toolcraft Exemplar is the wrong thing to balance the game around. Well, and then you end up in a spot where you're like, oh, well, because Toolcraft Exemplar exists, and, you know, Thalia's Lieutenant, all these different cards exist, then you're like, well, we need sweepers like Fumigate. And then you're like, oh, Fumigate is so insane. It's so crazy. We need to make sure there's stuff like Scrap Heap Scrounger. Scrap Heap Scrounger is necessary to make sure that we can balance Fumigate.
So
what if you didn't need to balance Fumigate?
Hold on. I got what you were saying in the move from Thalia's Lieutenant towards Toolcraft Exemplar, but I think that I don't buy. You know, they're like, all right, we're going to get a yes on this because of this idea that you're advocating for, which I get what you're saying, but it's not like it had Dwarfcraft, right? Like, it's best friends with Scrap Heap Scrounger, who's also a problem card, right? You didn't do any dwarfy things because of that. The window where people were actually playing dwarfs was like a week, right? They're like, we're going to play 3 dwarfs.
He's a dwarf. No, I know, but I'm saying that's why he's got the rate. It's not that he's a dwarf. He's not being used as a dwarf.
He was in some dwarfs for a while. There were some.
At times he showed up as a dwarf, and there were times where he was an artificer. That's not the thing. The point is that he was pushed so much so that he would show up, and the dream was fake. It wasn't like it was really that you were supposed to be playing dwarves. It would be one thing if the reason to play Toolcraft Exemplar is that he's like a super dope payoff for dwarf decks. I think that there's a risk. There's a real problem when you make it so that it's so spiky. Like, for instance, I think nobody has ever been as bad of an offender of this as Champion of the Parish. Do you remember just how different all the games were? Where it's like, okay, sometimes they have Champion of the Parish, sometimes they don't.
Yes, I've played Modern recently. So
Wild Nikado is messed up, but at least, like, Wild Nikado is a better Curd Ape. Champion of the Parish is so many steps above the stuff that it was, like, next to in its context.
Patrick, right now you can play Champion of the Parish in a way that you couldn't play it when Champion of the Parish was legal and standard. First of all, he's friends with Thalia's Lieutenant right now, and they both have Aether Vial. So you could just pop a mayor down during combat in case somebody has a trick.
I know.
Yeah,
that's fine. Modern's busted anyway.
I've played against it. Excuse me?
Modern's busted anyway. That type of stuff is par for the course.
I think
busted in a good way. Busted like it's a high-powered format, but it's balanced around good principles. Like, they used to be, Modern was this format involving, well, every deck just needs to be able to stick around and da-da-da-da. They cut off stuff at the top and didn't focus as much on always banning the most powerful cards, and they actually created a very diverse, awesome format with so much depth. And keep in mind, it's not going to be for everybody how powerful the format Modern is, but you cannot dispute that it is popular and diverse, and there is a lot of stuff you can do. There's so much stuff you can do, and whenever you're sick of losing to something, you can change your strategy in some way to be better against the thing you're sick of losing to.
I
think that's so healthy. That's so healthy. That's so good.
I played in 3 straight tournaments where I did not play against a first-turn Noble Hierarch, I know that probably sounds like an odd thing to say, but to play in 3 Modern tournaments in a row and not play against a first-turn Noble Hierarch, I think it's surprising, right? Because there's so many First Turn Noble Hierarch decks. It's just a testament to the diversity that you're talking about.
Sure. All right, dude, we should actually talk about at least one or more cards from the set that came out this weekend.
All right, let's do that. Let's end on the highest note.
You want to talk about one card? I don't know what the highest note is.
What do you think is the highest note, man?
I have no idea. There's so many different cards. There's so much stuff to look at.
A lot of it's sweet, too. Super sweet.
Okay, we have to talk about more than one. Okay, let's start. Tell you what, let's start by talking about any. All right, do you have a particular one that you...
Let's start with Baffling End. Start with the beginning. It's the first card in the set. Baffling End, 1 and a W. Enchantment. When Baffling End enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls with converted mana cost 3 or less. When Baffling End leaves the battlefield, target opponent creates a 3/3 green dinosaur creature token with trample.
It baffles me why you would want to end on this.
You got that?
What is there? It's just like a sorcery speed smother that has counterplay for them. Right, like it has exile, which is interesting, but they could destroy the enchantment and get a 3/3. So what?
I think it's going to be a pretty good card in Standard.
Yeah, it's fine. In particular, White's been just missing 2-cost removal, right? I mean, that's something they really need.
So one of the things I was thinking about is comparing this to, is it Silk Wrap?
Yeah.
So if you got rid of a Silk Wrap, you would get your actual thing back, right? And so the question is whether or not a 3/3 green dinosaur creature token is better or worse than the thing that you would have gotten. I think oftentimes it would actually be better.
Yeah, but sometimes it'll be worse. Particularly, I bet, knowing how these things go, I bet they're going to have there'll be some kind of a color hoser or something, and then it's all fancy because you can play with your main deck color hoser or something. You know what I mean? Where you're like, sometimes my opponent gets these things, and I can take advantage of it with, Yeah, that's fine. It's cool.
So I obviously think Baffling End was the most interesting thing to talk about, but you're right. We just needed to, just change the oil, go in a different direction.
I'm saying, what about Rekindling Phoenix?
Oh, Rekindling Phoenix. Hitting it.
2 red, 4/3 flying. 4/3 flying. When Rekindling Phoenix dies, create a 0/1 red elemental creature token. With at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature and return target card named Rekindling Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste until end of turn.
All right, so this card, it's drawing on a similar mechanic that's been super popular all different times. It's been in Standard. We've had morph versions and paying mana from the graveyard versions. I think this is an interesting implementation because it gives the opponent kind of a chance, right? Like when you have that 0/1 red elemental creature token in play, they can shock that and then you don't get the Phoenix back, right? That's the thing. Yeah? Is that the thing that's going on here?
That's one of the things. That's a thing.
4/3 flying for 4 is... it's not a throw it in the trash rate. I'm I'd think about this for a second because it's in red. And then the rest of this text is really powerful because
it is.
The rebuy version has haste, especially.
It's fantastic. Think about Thunderbreak Regent. Thunderbreak Regent... Right, this is a 4/3 flyer instead of a 4/4. But when your opponent targets it, instead of them taking 3 damage, you literally have a threat that they must kill, or their situation is just as bad as it was.
Well, it's kind of worse.
And what's more,
right?
what's more, Thunderbreak Regent interacting. Picture Thunderbreak Regent versus Sweepers. Whether it's Languish or any of the various White Wraths, right? But Rekindling Phoenix actually has advantage versus Sweepers. This card is excellent.
I think it's a pretty cool card. I think
this card, even in a world with Hazaret the Fervent and Chandra, I think Rekindling Phoenix is excellent and it's going to see success at high level play. I think meaningful success. I think this card is dope.
It's just different. right? Like, there's plausibly decks that would want to play Hazoret that would rather play Hazoret and or Chandra than Rekindling Phoenix. But I think that, for example, if you were playing a control deck and you just wanted to like side in some sort of like middle creature to change your strategy or mess up your opponent's sideboarding, I think like you would never side in Hazoret, but you might super be happy to side. Like, imagine a blue-red control deck. You could plausibly see them siding in Rekindling Phoenix, right? It's actually very in line with the kind of things that they would want to do. It's built-in card advantage. It's super resilient, right? So if you have relatively few threat cards in your deck, the problem often is the opponent couldn't side out enough creature removal, so they just end up killing all your guys anyway. Like, this guy actually has kind of a little bit of built-in insurance for that, and he flies, right? He's got a lot of stuff going on that could be good. He's actually an excellent blocker, right? Because you can block and trade if you're a control deck and then just, cash him in for an attack later.
What do you think about this guy in a deck that has sack outlets? Like, for instance, if you just have Yahenni Undying Partition, then you can actually respond to your opponent's Vraska's Contempt. Right? Like, or their cast out, or whatever. Because, like, the whole thing... So, Rekindling Phoenix is a super cool card because even though it's so resilient, it's got giant weaknesses. You can play with cards that are good against the Phoenix. And then you can play with cards that are good against the cards that are good against the Phoenix. There's so much depth to what's going on here. What if your opponent...
Like, what cards are good against the Phoenix? Like I understand that there are cards that can blunt the advantages of the Phoenix, but I don't think of that as the same as good against the Phoenix, because it's still a...
Vraska's Contempt.
Yeah, but like...
Cast out.
But Vraska's Contempt and Cast Out would just be fine against any forecasting cost threat. They're not, like, especially good against the Phoenix.
No, especially good against the Phoenix compared to other answers.
Compared to discarding
other
a card?
Like,
you know who's...
Starting what?
I said as opposed to discarding a card, which is what happens most of the time.
No. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, like, you're partially paying for the resilience on this thing. Like, okay, so let me give you an example. If you just have a Chandra, if your opponent plays a Phoenix, right? They play a Phoenix on 4. You do not want to play your Chandra. That's not that. I mean, you can, but it's not that great. It can be good, like if you go Chandra into like Chandra Plus and have everything else under control, and that's a precarious way to do it. But I think Rekindling Phoenix matches up so well against Chandra.
Yeah, I agree.
There's plenty of stuff that's good against the Phoenix, though. Like, if your opponent has Essence Scatter up, you're going to want to play Chandra instead of the Phoenix on that turn.
Who's fantastic against Rekindling Phoenix? Warkite Marauder.
Okay.
He is, right?
Sure.
He turns him off. I don't know. I think it was cool. Yes.
How about just a hostage taker? How about that? Boom. Got it.
Well, yeah, that's true. I'll buy that.
Yeah, no, I think Rekindling Phoenix is super good, and I'm betting we're going to see a bunch of it, and not just like main deck or side deck and some, and not just like a sideboard out of a control deck. I'm talking like just main deck, and you're like, for instance, it's possible you play some of these in Grixis Energy. Or it's possible you just play this in your black-red card advantage deck. It's possible you just play this in your red-green curve deck. There's a lot to try out with this one.
Do you think that the existing popularity of Glorybringer does much to just blunt how good Rekindling Phoenix is?
No. What are you talking about? It's great against Glorybringer. This card's great. You just put it out. What are they going to do? Okay, they play a Glorybringer. Right? Like, your 4-drop is sitting in play.
Yeah.
They play a Glorybringer on 5. Do they attack with it or not?
Yes.
And what do? Do they exert?
Well, they certainly don't want to let you trade, so they have to exert. Right?
So they exert, they get 4 damage through, and then you literally just get your Phoenix back, and it can attack immediately.
Oh, wow. What if
they've accomplished nothing?
What if we just played 4 Rekindling Phoenix, 4 Glorybringer? That sounds really good to me.
Sounds great.
That sounds I think outstanding top end.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think Chandra is so good of a card though that I think it's nice to mix up the amount of Rekindling Phoenix versus Chandra that you have.
I think it depends.
But I think,
right? Like maybe you just don't want to have that kind of spell, right? It's possible.
It's possible, but I think it's more likely that you're going to want to have a sweet thing to do when they have Essence Scatter.
Oh, that's a great point, right? Like if you
want to be able to get them both ways. If they have Negate, you have the Phoenix. If they have Essence Scatter, you have the Chandra.
I'm down. You've convinced me.
I do think that Rekindling Phoenix is just a much better thing to be good than Hazoret.
Well, the problem with Hazoret is sometimes you just don't play Magic, right? Like that's just what happens. Like if
and other times Hazoret doesn't do anything.
Well, it's just awful sometimes. The thing that's insult to injury with Hazoret is when you're like not so mana screwed that you couldn't cast Hazoret, but like you're mana screwed enough that your opponent keeps advancing and you're not. He's just terrible. Right? You're like, I'm going to spend 75% of my mana to discard a card to hopefully discard more cards. Yeah. But Rekindling Phoenix,
I think Rekindling Phoenix is super dope. I'm an early buyer of that one. I am in.
Yeah, I actually think that the banning of Ramunap Ruins makes for a very differently interesting just disposition on the color red, right? Like, the blue-red deck was extincted from Standard because of Ramunap Ruins, when previously it was one of the more popular decks, right? Like, no one could play because it couldn't beat Ramunap Ruins. Now there's like a whole different amount of interplay. I mean, the blue-red deck is still very vulnerable to the card Hazoret, right? But it's not just inevitably dead like it was against Ramunap Ruins.
I don't know. When I look at this Standard format, the two red strategies I see, and maybe I'm just like, maybe this is tunnel vision or something, but it sure does look like the best ways to play red or red aggro or red in an energy deck.
Well, I mean, you mean still with all of the bans?
Yeah, of course. They banned Attune with Aether and Rogue Refiner. They didn't ban Whirler Virtuoso or Harness Lightning. Those are the red energy cards. I think energy looks really good.
Yeah, I was thinking about maybe replacing Rogue Refiner with Jade Light.
Yeah, but that's
the same
you have
thing.
A leak. Not really, but okay.
Yeah, I have a leak because I just love Jade Light too much. Those kind of cards.
No, maybe it might be. I'm just saying there's a lot less incentive. Maybe, I mean, Long Tusk Cub is still a thing, but it's just you're not really playing an energy deck if you're like, it's weird with Attune with Aether and maybe you are. Maybe you're supposed to.
I was thinking about building advantages, right? Like I think cards like Rekindling Phoenix and Glorybringer are these cards that are just very advantage bearing, and that you can just play with a bunch of advantages along the way. That kind of like
what you're playing against the Scarab God.
It's very difficult. I don't know. Racing into the sky, that's a thing, right?
I think that you might be surprised at how powerful of a magic card the Scarab God can be.
Yeah, they just kill your flyer, and then they just have all your flyers for the rest of the game. Yeah, look, man, I don't like to interact with the Scarab God. Right. That's why I played, a combo deck for so long.
All right, man. Well, it definitely seems like we've got our work cut out for us with a brand new format where the rules of engagement are so radically different. Plus a brand new set, including Rekindling Phoenix and some other cards. Plus that one that we shall not name.
Look, it's going to be a bit different. I mean, you're probably right. Red aggro and energy are probably still going to be real strong, but I actually think that the bannings are going to do a huge amount for decks like blue-white. They're just going to be so much better than they were, in my opinion. Right? You're cutting off their worst enemies, and you're disincentivizing, the energy deck, which is so central to the format.
Yeah. All right. Thank you guys for joining us this week, and I guess make sure to check us out everywhere. Share us everywhere if you want, or don't. Honestly, I don't know.
Do please.
No, maybe. You know what? Maybe I don't know. It's your life, man. You got to live your life.
I will list out some places they can share us.
Let me guess. Patreon, among other places.
Oh, Patreon. Oh, you mentioned Patreon.
Hell yeah.
We'd love to thank Michael Capoccia, a patron.
Yeah, actually, in all seriousness, very much appreciate it.
Yep. So, but, share us various. So, iTunes, our own website, which is toplevelpodcast.com, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We're all those places. Peace.
Or don't.
No, do.
Make us deserve it. Make us earn it. See you next week.
Go back.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge, it's a jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind. Trapped in a vault with